Just froze. Mm. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Then when the internet is back, it the live stream just could not accept me to go back.
Yeah,
Um,
they don't make it easy for you to restart the session like Zoom.
yeah, yeah, like Zoom, you can just go back and once
Yeah.
it's done, it's like it's done. Anyways, you said you have like 20 minutes. We can just go through the rest of the points. So talk a little bit about the railway line at what happened in Machakos, and then you can move on to the boundaries, and then
Yeah.
we can do the Portuguese era in Kenya or East Africa.
Yeah. The other one is about the railway line. I saw someone tweet, and I looked up that tweet. I couldn't find it quickly. That the reason why the line avoids Machakos is because the engineer in charge of building the railway line had a personal beef against the European assigned to Machakos. That is not true because the survey for the railway line was done around 1891, 92-ish, around there. This was way before Machakos was built, had been built as a station. This was a long time before that, before the colonial government had decided to make Machakos as big place as it became. So, and the person who built who surveyed the line was a different person. It was not the same guy who was building the line itself. So the survey was done like 6 years before or seven, yeah, many years before. So the survey was done by another person, a different person altogether called MacDonald. So when MacDonald was surveying the line, John Ainsworth was not in the Machakos. So it could not have been the reason why the line avoids Machakos. And by the way, as a side note, when the survey group was surveying the line, they did their survey and they went up to Kisumu. On the way back, when they got back to Kikuyu, that's when the fight between Wayaki Wahinga and the European in charge of the station happened. And it was the survey party themselves who we are told to take Wayaki to the coast for exile. So that's a nice little tidbit of history that we sometimes forget. So the survey party, if you look at their notes, their diary, they did take Wayaki, and he died with them at Kibwezi. We can discuss that another time. All right, so that's the railway line. The
Yeah,
other
that's
one,
a very interesting. Sorry,
mhm.
my camera is. I'm trying to mute and then unmute, then I'm touching the camera. Yeah, that's a very interesting history that maybe we should have another session where we talk only about only that. It's an interesting history that
Yeah,
we should explore more. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Continue with the.
And by the way, when I have been trying to find out exactly the circumstances of Wayaki's death at Kibwezi and where he was buried. And so I thought one possible document that could help us is the diary of, the writings of that survey party on the way to the coast. I think the best source, the best document that has it was in Macmillan Library because I saw a reference to it in another book. Unfortunately, that document at Macmillan has long disappeared. So if I tried looking it up in Macmillan, they didn't have it. But I did read the diaries of the survey party, the guy that was in charge taking him to the coast. Uh, it does not dwell too much on Wayaki or what happened at Kibwezi, so I couldn't find out. I also looked into the original, as much as I could find, uh, Presbyterian Church documents for Kibwezi, because if you remember, they were in Kibwezi before going to Kikuyu. And I can see that in their map of the station, the missionary station, they do have a cemetery. So I'm hoping perhaps when we have time to dig into that a little more, we have an idea where that burial could have happened. All right. The next one is about the Portuguese era. So again, this is not a myth as such. It's just a point of information. Uh, we might presume that when the Portuguese were here in the coast, here meaning the East African coast, Tanzania, Mozambique, all the way to Kenya, that their behavior towards Africans was the same as what happened in the 1880s and 90s when the British came. And that is not true. The key differentiator by the Portuguese was not race, it was religion. So they did not, they were not, I'm not saying they were blind to race, but it was a lot less significant of a differentiator than religion. And in fact, the Portuguese were perfectly okay with intermarriage between them and African people and Arab people. It was not a big deal. And that is something that surely never happened when the British came. No, it couldn't happen. We'll come to that. Um, so that's the
Yeah, before you
Portuguese.
continue,
Mhm.
I just a small point on that. I think, and I did make a video maybe 2 years ago, and I said this issue, the way we look at race today is so much influenced by what has happened maybe in the last 300 years. And we think that's how it goes all the way to the past.
Yes,
And I said that after reading Herodotus' histories, maybe it's a book you've read. And while he doesn't dwell so much on race relationships, but you could see the small bits that comes out that in the far back you go, race wasn't the way we look at it today. At least that's what
correct.
I got from reading that book. That even when he talks about traveling all over the world, and then he talks about race here and there, it wasn't the way we think of it today. Yeah.
Correct. You're completely right. We sometimes think the way things are today are the same they have always been. No. Now, one example: the Portuguese at one time appointed someone in Mombasa to become the Sultan of Mombasa, and they actually had that person marry a Portuguese woman in order to cement their relationship. So you can clearly see the race was not a big deal whatsoever during that time period. Religion was a much bigger issue. Their antagonism with Islam was a big problem, much more than race. So that's the Portuguese era. One more that came to mind as we were having the internet issue is about Sheng. If you ask most people when Sheng began, you might hear of maybe early 80s or 1970s or somewhere around there. But actually, I am
If you ask
surprised.
me, I would have said 80s.
Yeah, I am surprised. And I'll send you the reference I'm going to discuss right now. I came across a document published in a scholarly publication in 1954. So not 64, not 74, but 1954. This was at the very, very beginning of the emergency period. That document is, I believe, about language, and it talks about, it does not say Sheng, because Sheng, the word Sheng came much later. But it talks about the young people of Nairobi twisting and changing Swahili, mixing up Swahili and English, and it gives many examples. And any person, any reasonable person, when you read that, you will get a chance to see it. You can clearly tell this is Sheng. This is nothing but Sheng. The way we use English words, but we pronounce them or we have the spelling of Swahili, Swahili spelling. For example, when you say someone is punished, instead of saying the equivalent, translating Swahili, you might say kupanishiwa, kitu kama hiyo. So exactly. So Sheng did not start in the 70s or 80s or whatever. No, it started way, 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 way long time ago. And it's not just one or two words, because language, language is a complex thing. But as you have said yourself many times, uh, so you always, anytime you have intermixture of communities and cultures and all that, you have language interplay. But you can tell from the sheer number of words given in this publication, you can tell there was a culture that was growing up, a language culture that was growing up in Nairobi, that was clearly, even that time, it is recognizable as Sheng. And the word itself, Sheng, came much later, but that shift, the change, the culture of Sheng was already present by 1954. And by the way, if it was if it was present in 1954 for someone to publish about it, that tells you it was actually had begun way earlier than 1954. So it must have begun maybe in the late 40s. So that blew my mind when I read that. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'll send that to you.
For
Mhm.
somebody to recognize it as something they have to create a document of, it
Yeah.
means it had been around for a while. And still, that's another. It's an example of something, of a phenomenon that I always describe, and this is, we humans have this weakness of, when we live in a certain, of course all of us live in a generation, and we always think our generation is unique.
Yes.
All of us think that. All of us, people who've lived before us, people who are living today, people who will come after us, all of us think our generation is unique. But the more you study history, you realize, no, 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 there's nothing unique here. As there's this saying of, there's nothing new under the sun. At some point, you come to realize, okay, maybe that is true. There's nothing under the sun. So you can talk of Sheng today in Kenya. But of course, there's Creole, of course,
Yes.
is it Mauritius, and then you go
Uh,
to West Africa, the Pidgin language. All those are some form of Sheng, and they've been here for maybe 200-300 years, or maybe a little bit less than that. But anyway, it's been a while. Yeah, maybe the
yeah.
the point you've not talked about, and I know this is where you've even written a book about this, and that is around the
Boundaries.
boundaries.
Oh yeah.
So what myths are there in the boundaries? And I want you to focus on what did you discover when, for example, doing research for your book, that really astonished you in very high, or in ways that you didn't even imagine would happen.
Yes. Yeah. That's very true. And by the before I go back to the boundaries issue, back to Sheng and what you just said. Yeah, we think the way things are today is all that stuff. Uh, Human beings are the same. Um, some of it is the same, and sometimes we think the way we view things as Africans or as people from Central or whatever is much different from, say, Wazungu or Russians or whatever, but they're the same. I came across a very funny, and it's actually not funny. It's funny when you read it today, but I think it must have been painful to the family. I came across something Mzungu did to his wife in around 1900, uh, which when you read it, you can I don't mean you can understand, but you can see it happening. But we do not think it could have happened that time. But so human behavior cuts across culture, time, and all that. So what this Muzungu did was, and it says so. I'll share that with you. He told his wife, they were in the UK, or I think the UK. So he told his wife they are moving to Kenya. Those days Wazungu were coming to Kenya, settlers or whatever. So he said they were moving. And he actually put his wife on a ship and the family to come to Kenya. The wife, and he said he was coming after. The wife came. When she landed in Mombasa, guess what? She discovered the guy was not coming and he had no intentions. He was just getting rid of his family. And what now here is the kicker. He was doing that in order to be left with their babysitter in the UK. Yeah, it's sad. So I'll share that with you. You can when we get to do a live show on a laptop, and I can share some of that documentation. You can see. So I
Yeah,
found
yeah.
that very
The next one we are
insightful.
going to do it on a laptop, so that it's easy to share some of those
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
those
Yeah. So
documents. Yeah.
it was very insightful, interesting. I could not forget. So coming to the boundaries. Now, this one is a long topic, but I'll go through it very quickly. When the British and the Germans, when they drew the line between Kenya and Tanzania, it's a straight line. Most of it, not all of it, but most of it is a
Yeah.
straight line. You know, it has some twists along the coast, around Vanga, around Mount Kilimanjaro, but 90% of it is just a straight line. When they did that, in my research, that is the only, I'm talking of the East African boundaries, not other boundaries. Of course, when you look at Mali, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, those countries are just straight lines all over the place. Even
Or
Sudan,
even
Ethiopia,
Libya is another one, very straight lines.
yes.
Yeah.
So obviously, at that time, nobody cared whatsoever. They just decided the line will be here and it was there. But when you look into the Kenyan boundaries, say, let's give an example of the boundary between Kenya and Uganda. When they decided that they are going to move the boundary, initially it was, as you know, it was somewhere around Limuru, somewhere around there. But it was not defined by then. So nobody knew exactly where the line was in Limuru or Naivasha. All that they knew was it was somewhere around Limuru, Naivasha
Around
line.
Naivasha, somewhere
Anyway,
there.
when they decided to move the boundary where it is today, they actually appointed two people. One, obviously, they were white people from the Uganda side of the colonial administration and the Kenyan side of the colonial administration. The instructions given to them clearly said that they need to look into tribal boundaries. So the instructions themselves are telling us that they were not careless, or they didn't. They actually took care to look into the tribal boundaries. The report that they gave shows that they actually made great effort to do that, to avoid dividing tribes. Now, they were not doing it because out of love for Africans. They were not doing it because they don't want to divide you from your cousins, who are now in Uganda. No, they were doing it because it's easier administration when you don't have tribes divided between two colonies. It's as simple as that. So they did make an effort to avoid dividing tribes. Now, how comes even after all that effort, let's assume that they made the effort, how come the boundaries are still dividing tribes? The reason is even at that point, around 1902, when that boundary was moved, or around 1915 or 1920, when the Kenya Somali boundary was drawn, how come we still divided tribes? The reason is, even at that time, it was impossible not to divide tribes because people were constantly moving, people were spread all over in the region. It was impossible to draw those lines without dividing tribes. The same thing happened in the Kenya Somali boundary or even the Kenya Ethiopia boundary. Exact same thing. If you look into how they divided how the line came about, the current Kenya Somali boundary, initially, as you know, the line was much further east in the river Juba. So Kenya was much wider than it is today. They gave part of it between the river Juba and where the boundary is today. They gave it to Somalia, because to Italy. They gave it to Italy because Italy supported the British side during World War One. So it was a deal made in 1915. If you join the war on our side, we are going to give you something in the African continent. So that's something. One of the big things they got was that section. When they
And
did
what
that,
about this story? Sorry to cut you. What about this story of that what we know today is, or what used to be the northeastern province, that it was given to Kenya? Because that's something I ran into a lot. People saying, I did a video about Somalis in Kenya, and especially on TikTok, not so much here on YouTube. I see a lot of, and mostly it's people from the Somali community saying, do you know that it used to be called the Northern Frontier something? I think it's a word maybe you are
y-
aware of. And
yeah,
they make this claim of that used to be part of Somalia, and then the British somehow brought it to Kenya. What is the story there?
Yeah, let me come to that. But let me answer Hilary Onyango on the comments. They're saying, but the Kenyan side was no further than Naivasha. Was Naivasha? Yes, the Kenyan side was actually only went up to somewhere between Limuru and Naivasha, somewhere around there. Like I said, the boundary had never been demarcated there, so there is no exact spot where you could say the line was. But it is true the Uganda extended all the way to Naivasha or thereabouts. Yes, so that is true. In 1902, the British, who were the masters in both sides of the boundary, they decided, and I can go back, I can go into that another time. They decided to move the boundary to the west, to closer to where it is today. So they did so. The reasons are we can do it another time. Now, back to what you are saying about the Northern Frontier Province and Somalia and all that. It's a big topic. Initially, the boundary was along the boundary between Somalia and Kenya. I mean, at that time it was not Somalia; it was Italian Somaliland. The boundary ran along the River Juba, so that had been agreed between the Italians and the British. So it ran along the river from Kismayu all the way up north along the river, all the way up to the point where it meets the Ethiopian boundary. But in 1915, like I said, there was a secret agreement. It was a secret agreement. And the way it became known is actually a funny story by itself. There was a secret agreement between the British and the Italians. The British said, if you, the Italians, join World War One on our side, we will give you something in Africa. So that was the agreement. After the war ended, the Italians began asking, hey, you promised us something. What are you going to give? And so the British decided, we'll give you what is now between the River Juba and the current boundary. So that part was not given to, there was nothing in the northern frontier, as far as I know, and I'm very careful. I can say this with confidence. Nobody gave that part to Kenya or to whatever. No, nobody. It was all the British by themselves who were deciding where the line was going to be. Now, coming to what I was saying, the when they decided the boundary will be here, they actually tried. They made an effort. Now, we may today in 2025, we may discount and say they did not put enough effort. True, or they did not care. They do not care to ask the individual people. Very true. But they did try to find where the boundaries between the various tribes were. But it was impossible to do because, as you know, uh, in that part of Kenya and Somalia, people are nomads, so they move around a lot. Also, even if they were not nomads, for those who are not nomads, for example, in between Kenya and Uganda, that area is, you know, Mount Elgon and Lake Victoria, that place, people are not nomads. They are mostly subsistence farmers. But people have moved over time. So you have people who were here, but over maybe 20 years, they have shifted and they have moved over to another area. So it was impossible to know where is your quote unquote ancestral land. People move all the time. People used to move all the time. So even then, it was impossible to do. I think what I'll do is maybe another time in the future, you and I can go through some of this and go through some of this documentation to show what I'm talking about.
Yeah, especially the Somali Kenya border. I know it's kind of sensitive topic to some extent,
Yes.
um, but I think we got to go through the. Especially you mentioned that there is a secret agreement that happened in
Oh,
1915
can I
between
say
the
can I say
British.
something? Can I say
Okay.
something about the agreement? You know the way it came known. It was a secret agreement. The way it became known is very funny. Very funny. You know the Bolsheviks took over Russia in
1970.
1917
Mhm.
when because they were aware of that agreement. And the Bolsheviks, one of their core principles was that they would never have secret agreements, international agreements. So when they took over power, they went to the government records and they saw that agreement. They published it in the newspapers. So that's when it became known that the British and Italians had this secret agreement, among many other things. So that's when it became known.
How did the Russians came into possession of this agreement?
Because they were
What?
party to that agreement. Remember, in
Why?
World War One,
Oh,
Russia,
okay. See.
yeah, Russia and the British and the French were on one side. The Germans and other people were on the other side. So the Russians were or both asking, the Russians, the British, the French, were asking the Italians, hey, please join the war on our side. Yes. And there
Okay.
were
Now
other changes. There were other
I see
changes.
how
So it's
they came in possession of that agreement, or they came to, or they knew about it and they were involved in it because they were fighting with the British during that time. Of course, during the two world wars, they fought
yeah,
on the side of the British.
yeah.
Somebody is
Yeah,
asking,
one more thing. Let me say, Hans Money is saying about Lamu belonging to Somalia, all that stuff. Like I said, we'll go into this a little more detail, but let me say one quick thing. When the British were leaving Kenya, by the way, they left Kenya in a big hurry. That is something we do not fully appreciate. If you had asked anybody in January 1959 whether the British would leave Kenya in only 3 years, they would have laughed at you. No, the average person on the street would never have expected the British to leave. When they decided to leave, remember the Winds of Change speech by the British Prime Minister in 1960. So when they decided to leave, it was a little bit of in a hurry. This question came up: what should happen? Because the people in what is today what was called the Northeastern Province, the Somalis were some people were asking, "Hey, we want to be part of Somalia. We don't want to be part of what is independent Kenya." So the British, in their habit, they came up with a commission. They set up a commission, and they told the commission, "You go and ask all those tribes, all those people, uh, find out what do they really want. Do they want to be on the Kenyan side or the Somali side?" So they did. And if you look through the records, and the records are available today, if you look at the submissions, you can read the submissions of various people, the chiefs and other people. When you look at the submissions of those people, you can see how they all make conflicting claims to particular places. So, for example, if we are talking of place A, let's say a well called A, you will see this tribe saying, no, we have always watered our cattle there, that has always been ours. And another tribe called B will come up and say, no, that actually has been ours. We were gifted that by, in this year or this time period. And we have also always watered our cattle. It was taken from us by force. Kitu kama hiyo. So you will find a lot of conflicting claims to ownership all over the place. So it was not possible in 1960 when the British were deciding to leave Kenya to come up with a fair way to divide that to decide what to do. So what they decided to do was simply to give it to Kenya and run away. The same thing happened on the coast. They set up another commission, Kenya Coast Commission or kitu kama hiyo. I can get the exact name of the commission, and you can read the deliberations and the submissions given to that commission. A lot of people, Arabs, Swahili people, other people, they were all saying, they were all giving their opinions. The British didn't care. They gave the coast to Kenya. And the only thing that they needed to do was, because it was nominally owned by the Zanzibar Sultan, what they did was to ask the Sultan of Zanzibar to officially give up any claim to Kenya in the future. He did. So we can go through the documentations for a lot of this. It's very,
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, I think we should do. I think maybe we should break this into specific focus on each live stream so that we have very detailed and also looking because I will prefer, yeah, we rely mostly on documentation that we can find and less of speculation. Of course,
Yes,
speculation comes, but we try to limit that because some of these topics are a bit sensitive. You don't want to say
yes,
something and then somebody tomorrow runs and says, oh, so and so said this. So there are
yeah.
questions here. I'm seeing somebody, I think you had answered Hillary, or this is a different question. Help us,
Yeah.
did Somalia, Kenya lose Oromia region? I don't know what that question.
Help us. Let me. That's a big one. Let me come back to that later when we have another session because of time on my side. I see the
Okay.
question from Hillary. Did Kenyatta use force to retain NFD? Yes, he did. Remember, at that time when Kenyatta came into power, it had already been decided, the boundaries had been decided that the northern frontier province will be part of Kenya. So he did, yes.
Yeah, so the other one you said is a kind of heavy question. Maybe we should have.
Yes.
I've taken a note so that we might come
Yeah.
back to that.
And
So
let,
I
let me let
think
me let me let me say one quick thing about the question from Hillary about Kenyatta using force. It had been decided, and I believe it was the right decision by the OAU right from the beginning that we should not try to adjust the boundaries of African countries because trying to do them, we will invite fighting and wars forever and ever. And I think there is merit to that, and I think that was the right decision. So Kenyatta was simply doing what had been agreed to by all other countries, with very few exceptions.
so. There is an actual document that says that, or there, of course, there is something that was signed at or voted on at the AU then, that they shouldn't make these a lot of these
Yes,
changes on the ground.
yes, it was an official agreement. So I'll discuss that. There was an official agreement that they will not open up this topic because if you open up, every country will be fighting with every other country. Look into all the boundaries of Kenya. There are tribes in between the boundaries. It would not be possible to draw any line to divide them whatsoever. And so the decision was made that the official decision was made to do that. Yes, so I can share that too. I can give reference to that. As you said, we want to make sure claims or discussions done here are grounded in, can be referenced, something official. So we are not speculating or giving just a wild opinion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's how we will proceed. And anybody watching, uh, just know we are going to go. We're going to focus on each of these issues. Right, today was just the first thing, and we've had a lot of issues. The stream halting point, and we are learning anyways. This is a very fast one. So going forward, it's going to become better, hopefully, and it's going to be we put in the effort at least to make it better.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I can see Onyango has another question on how Kenya lost Mount Kilimanjaro. That's another wonderful topic, wonderful topic, and I'll be happy to dive into that too. The R&B is saying in 1925, Britain ceded Jubaland to Italy. Yes, that's true. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes, they agreed to give something to Italy in 1915, but the discussion and agreement on exactly what to give up happened in the 1920s, and the Survey Party uh, did their work, I think, 1925 or 26. What is the Ilemi Triangle? So we'll come to that later
yeah, I've
because of
heard
time
of
on my
that,
side.
but I don't have very deep understanding. But I've heard of it being discussed here and there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something maybe some people are interested in. So I guess you need to go.
Yes.
We can think the best way to go forward is to pick specific point, and then we explore it in detail, and then that gives you the opportunity to, of course, to prepare and provide the relevant documentation.
Yeah.
So
All right.
overall, I think we did well. It's the first live stream. Yeah. So maybe you have something you want to say as we
Uh,
end.
no, thank you very much for this chance to be on your show. The first, I think, one of the first episodes I listened from you was the one you discussed about what documents to rely on as reference. That was wonderfully done. Wonderful. You covered all the points about why you have to use references made by the British and the colonialists. You went over exactly what I would have done. So that was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, because I
We
realized very many people have a problem with me talking about documents that have been created by the British, and I think most of them assume that I'm kind of like putting a signature that this is a tick. Maybe that's partly to blame for that. Maybe I make it seem so, but that's not my way of thinking. It's just acknowledging that if a source exists, it has to be looked at, and sometimes is the only source is there, but you have, of course, to look at it, understanding that there are biases, there are interests,
Yeah.
who created it for what reason. There is always that risk, of course.
Yeah.
So I decided to do that video. It's good to hear that
Yeah.
you thought the points were good points.
Completely. Completely.
Yeah.
And by the way, when you look into those archives made by the British and the Germans, the Italians, they are very helpful because they have they show evils they themselves did towards Africans. So they are this best evidence we have or what happened. For example, there is Charles Eliot was a commissioner, what became known as a
Yeah.
governor of Kenya, and he writes himself with his own hand, not the secretary, not someone else. He writes with his own hand how frustrated he is because Africans cannot go look for hired work. Because when you go look for hired work, you can be taxed, but they are not going to look for hired work. So what is he going to do? So you can see the frustration he has, and he says that's why. I'm summarizing a big topic about taxation and all that. That's why people had to be forced to go work in settler farms in order for them to be taxed. Because if
Yeah,
you think about it, Africans were
I
just
like the point
happy.
you made.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like the point you make. These people, in their own documents, admit to very terrible things
Yes,
that in today's time they will not have. They will not have. But because they
correct.
lived in that era, they were so comfortable to make some claims in official documents
Yes,
that they become the best source you can get. I was even telling somebody, when you read some of these documents, you see the crimes that were performed. If there
yes,
was a chance that these documents have to be put in front of a jury or a tribunal, they are very good evidence against the British. But these documents come from them. But they are very good documents that can be
yeah.
used against them. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Another one is that you can find in the same documents is you can find documented cases from the missionaries themselves, not anybody, the missionaries themselves, about taking land away from Africans for the mission. It's
yeah,
all there in their documents, not from a colonial official, not from an African, but from their own documents. You can find brutal cases like the one I shared with you, which maybe you can share another time, about what happened in Mogadishu.
yeah,
An Englishman, what he did there in 1918, 1919, which led to his deportation. What he did
yeah.
was horrific, horrific.
Yeah, so these documents, and I'll ask the people who watch my videos to
Mhm.
understand that perspective that some of these, and you should remember that most of these documents were created by people who, in that at that point, could not even imagine that the Africans will at one time read these documents. So they were writing these documents for other Europeans. They didn't
Yes.
imagine that at some point there's an African who is going to sit down and read these documents because, of course, most of them had this, uh, we can say, wrong understanding that these
Yeah.
people will never do that.
Yeah.
So they
And,
write
and,
this, they are very
and
transparent about their feelings and their interests
yes.
and their goals.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
also you can see communication between different factions or different viewpoints between the colonial officials and settlers, and it's very interesting, very insightful to see this discussion. I'll give you an example, and I can do this all day, but I'll give you one quick one. So there is the Europeans who were looked to be progressive or friendly to Africans. They were looked down by the other Wazungu. So there is this document here. There is a document I read from I think a missionary who had been to Kenya. Then he went back home to the UK, and he was talking. He was very much against what the colonial government was doing about land, labor, and all that stuff. So this colonial official or settler, I forget which is which. So he was responding to that missionary, and he says, "You over there in the UK, you are too soft, or you're too, what people say now about you're simple-minded. You are a social justice warrior. You know that stuff.
You are
It,
naive, maybe.
naive. That's the word I was looking for. You are naive. You don't know what you're talking about because you live in the UK. You don't live here with these Africans. You have no idea what you're talking about. So
You don't know.
reading, yes. So reading that exchange, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It shows what you're saying, that there was never any thought that these documents would be read by Africans at some point in the future. So they were very honest about it. And you can see there were a few cases of Europeans who were very sympathetic to Africans in a wonderful way. A few, not many. I can count like 4 or 5 who were wonderful. Who were wonderful. One of them actually went on to marry an African woman, and he was looked down by other missionaries. And then he went even further because he married multiple African women. He became a polygamist. So you can imagine how that went down. And then he writes to the headquarters, and we'll discuss that another time in the future.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Yeah, including that. Maybe Shubeka, there's also, you are going into something else I've thought of. We always think of Wazungu as a monolith when it comes to
Yes,
how they viewed the
yes,
natives, as they call them, the Africans. But they were not. They were, even those who did not like us, they were not of the same. There were those who
yes,
thought these people are inherently inferior to us. There are those who thought these people are just ignorant. There are those who thought they're just from a different civilization or something like that. So they are not the same. So
yes,
because I know you are rushing,
yes,
um, I see there's many. I see Fred Obado, language evolves every time. No language is static. Yeah,
yeah,
that's true. That's true. I think he's talking about the Sheng thing. The people you called Kwafi are Nilotic, not Cushitic. Yeah,
yeah.
that's another topic. I don't know whether you watched that
I
video, and
did,
I think,
I did.
yeah, so I think it's also another explosive one about
Yeah,
the grouping of people into these language groups. Some people take them to be their genetic groupings.
yeah. It's
I
very
think they are,
artificial.
yeah.
It's very artificial. The way those groupings are done is very artificial.
Yeah, but there are people who've taken them to be actually genetically based, and
Mm.
they are very and yeah. So, but I guess people who still will disagree with me, which is okay. It's good to
Yeah,
disagree. We don't have to agree on everything.
yeah.
North Range, Trustland, discuss later. Let me make point about that. North Range, North Range, Trustland. I've never heard of that. Maybe you know of that.
I'll look
Um,
into it later. So I don't
yeah,
see
I've
that
never.
comment about North, but I don't see that one. I'll look it up later after when I'm done.
Yeah, it's by Hilary Onyango again. He says North
Okay.
Range Trust Land discuss later. Yeah, he just says
Oh,
maybe
I
you should
see.
have.
I see. I
You
get
say,
what you get what you're saying. Yeah. All
yeah.
right. Let me disappear. I have to
Yeah.
leave. It's
So
yeah.
thank you very much. We will plan more and let everyone know maybe 2 days before what the topic
Yes.
is, so that people can know the time, and then we like not like today. It was just a few hours of notice. Anyway, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye bye. Good job.
Bye. Bye.